bed. It's very harsh and dangerous to go out into the street.
In 1984, Goldsmith and Milken made their first major assault. The Crown Zellerbach Corporation owned vast forests throughout America. From the timber, they made many of the paper products sold in America and employed thousands of workers. The Zellerbach Corporation was run from San Francisco by an elite group of international managers.
There was a very strong sense of social responsibility, very strong. There was also a sense of power for the sake of power, no question. People love power. Everyone likes to be powerful. And their power was very powerful because it didn't come from the amount of money you got in your bank account or your assets. It came from a whole empire that was there.
Goldsmith and his team went to the Crown Zellerbach headquarters to make their initial bid. The world they stepped into was the opulent existence of a patrician elite who had run America for 50 years.
I think they started by treating us with total contempt, as if this could never happen to them. You have the syndrome of the head of Crown Zellerbach, I think, probably was reckoned to be a rather godlike figure by about 250,000 people. If you really added up all their present employees, their relatives, their past employees, their pensioners, everything. I mean, he was a big figure in San Francisco. They were sort of impregnable. They were part of the scene. They weren't, and so this was shock treatment. When we first went there, we were treated with contempt. There was nothing, just brush us aside as if we were flies, And so it was a shock when they found that we were serious.
Crown Zellerbach was no match for the power of the junk bond. Using the borrowed money, Goldsmith simply bought up the shares of the corporation, and there was nothing the managers could do to stop him. Overnight, he became one of the biggest landowners in America. Goldsmith immediately began tearing the corporation apart. He sold off factories and sacked thousands of workers. He did this to pay back the interest. He also made a vast profit for himself. But to the Drexel bankers, it was the reconstruction of America by the power of the market.
Hostile takeover, okay? Hostile to whom, okay? It's not hostile to the shareholders, the owners, okay? It's not hostile to the workers.
Except for those who get sacked.
It's not hostile to them. I wish to God that we'd have had a hostile takeover movement in the 50s. We'd still have a steel industry to speak of in the United States of America, okay? We exported all those jobs to Southeast Asia because we wouldn't make the decisions within our corporate structure here. And everybody says, oh, bust up, junk bond, hostile takeover? Give me a break. Wordsmithing. It's not what happened at all. The market works. The economics make it happen, okay?
Goldsmith now became one of the leaders of the hostile takeover movement. Obscure entrepreneurs, guided and funded by Michael Milken, began to take over the old corporations of America. However big the target, Milken was always able to raise more than enough money to snap it up. And as each corporation toppled, a plaque celebrating its downfall was made by the bankers.
These represent some of the deals that Drexel did. These happen to be my clients, a small number of Drexel clients that we financed, and represented up here is close to, over 4 or 5 years, close to $20 billion of financing. An example, there's the National Can deal of $365 million for Nelson Peltz. There's the different tranches of financing for Ronald Perlman of Revlon, which comes to $3 billion approximately. Most of these were all debt deals that Milken created for the 80s.
Junk bonds.
Yeah, high yield bonds. We can say junk bonds, we can say high yield.
You prefer high yield?
Doesn't matter now.
What Milken personally built was a network that in effect operated like a takeover mill. You know, identifying, teeing up, and blowing away companies. Identify them, tee them up, blow them away. Identify them, tee them up, blow them away. Milken was in control of the entire process. He was like the commanding general of the armies. Goldsmith was like one of his important weapons, but only one. You should think about Goldsmith as a transitional figure, one of the agents of the change, one of the principal agents prying the levers of power from the hands of corporate America and government and putting it into the marketplace, to the day-to-day decision-making of people in the stock market.
Goldsmith's aim was to get as much money as possible out of the corporations he took over, both for the shareholders and for himself. To do this, he systematically stripped out any excess costs. He employed a man called Al Dunlap to do this. Dunlap used a new name to describe what he did. He called it downsizing. Dunlap's nickname was Chainsaw.
I was the first executive who was really doing downsizing on a large scale and was willing to talk about what I was doing, how I was doing, and was also willing to articulate the fact that this is necessary. We were operating on sick companies, cutting out the cancers. Sometimes it could involve as much as 35% of the people. And of course, one must close some of the operations that should have never been open. Our people that we were concerned about were the shareholders, the people who owned the corporation, the people that owned it before we bought it, the people that were investors with us, because we felt the shareholder owns the corporation.
It's getting to be a disaster. You know, I mean, people just out of work, and there's nowhere you can find work. Food stamps going out, the relief program is going down. There's no work nowhere.
You're in restitution, sir. The restitution clerk will give you your check and your receipt. Just step aside.
As the takeover boom grew, millions of workers were downsized. Whole towns were decimated when the factory that had once been their main employer was closed. Ever since the war, management consultants had argued that one of the main functions of a corporation was to create jobs. But now, overnight, a new breed of consultant appeared who explained that these layoffs were necessary.
For 40 years, for 70 years, for 80 years, we have attempted to rationalize and make bloodless the practice of professional management. Maybe that was appropriate 70 years ago, but in today's volatile environment, it just simply will not work. It is the most frightening, scary environment that I know of. Further, it has led me, for instance, to welcome the role of such dubious characters as the corporate raiders and their hostile takeovers. Throughout the economies of the industrialized world, we are beset with a degree of ambiguity, uncertainty, and madness never before seen, and I thus wholeheartedly welcome anyone of any sort at any time in any place who will scare the wits out of the still at the sleep at the helm leaders of our larger firms.
I think up to the point in time the takeovers came in, management consultancy existed to reinforce and serve management. I think it now exists to reinforce and serve the capital markets, the capital system.
One of the largest owners of shares in corporate America were the pension funds. They invested billions of dollars in the stock market to provide pensions for retired workers. The funds had been deliberately created as a part of the post-war corporate utopia that took care of workers. But now the funds became important weapons in the takeovers. They were offered much greater return on their investments if they backed the raiders.
Well, the raiders, on the whole, were not viewed with a lot of friendliness, let's say. A lot of them seemed to be mostly out for themselves and would proceed in their raiding activities even if it meant damaging companies that had long histories of good employee relations or long positions of importance in their local communities or whatever. But nevertheless,